Hello, and welcome to our Wednesday Bible Study podcast. I'm sorry I'm later than normal today. I had my sister and her husband and a couple of my niece and nephew were in Charlotte. They normally live in Texas, and so we met them for some early Christmas lunch, I guess you'd say. And so that kind of put me behind schedule in terms of being able to get here and do the Bible study. But I appreciate everybody's patience with that. I know a lot of you folks don't actually even listen to it live, but for those that do, I am sorry that I am a couple hours later than normal. But that said, we are here and ready to go. And I'll wait. I have a couple of just reminder announcements at the end about some things happening this weekend, but I'll talk about that at the very end because I want to jump into our Bible study as we're continuing on looking at the lives of the Pharisees, the lives of the patriarchs, and so we're going to go. We're back with Joseph today, and we're going to go to Genesis chapter 39, beginning in verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites. If you remember, his brothers had sold him to this caravan of Ishmaelites. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he owned. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. And so the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left Joseph in charge of everything that he owned, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything. Potiphar didn't, except the food which he ate. Well, Potiphar's kind of just saying, I don't have to worry about anything. Joseph will take care of it all, and he's so competent in God's favors upon him. If you remember back once again when Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and even though this very bad thing happened to Joseph, the Lord was with him. I think the humiliating experience of being sold into slavery, it seems to cure Joseph of any arrogance that might have been left in his character. He's a humbler Joseph, let's just say that, and you see that as he goes along. In his life as he matures, just kind of the arrogance, the cockiness, the sureness. He just it just dissipates out of his life. And so he sold into this man's house named Potiphar, and he was one of these wealthy, powerful officials in the court of Pharaoh. And this Potiphar realizes that Joseph, he was competent, he was a hard worker, he was honest and successful, and I think in a lot of ways he saw that God, or maybe from Potiphar's perspective, Joseph's God, blessed him and granted him favor in everything that he did. So he didn't have to worry about anything. His life was worry-free when Joseph was in charge. Unfortunately, this doesn't last forever because of Potiphar's wife. So there's no doubt, though, that God's favor was on Joseph. Everywhere he went, he was successful, not only in Potiphar's house, but before that and after that. All of his dealings, whether it be in his father's household, whether it be in Potiphar's household, whether it be in the jail, or eventually in the very house of Pharaoh, everything that Joseph did, he ended up being successful and prosperous. Everything prospered in his direction and care. Almost, we might say, he had the golden touch. But even through all of these times of God's blessing and prosper and favor on Joseph's life, there was always these attacks, these struggles, these injustices, they also followed Joseph for his whole life, except for maybe to the very end. For part of his life, he just couldn't seem to get a foothold. Okay, he would get in a place and he would begin to prosper and succeed, and then boom, he'd get knocked back down. Especially when he tried to live with integrity. It would just seemingly slap him back down again. Of course, eventually, as he's in the vice president, if you will, the vice pharaoh of the regent, I think would probably be the official title of all of Egypt, he kind of is insulated a little bit from at least getting slapped back down. I'm sure he still had his problems. But it reminds me, Joseph's life does, a little bit of that quote by Tevi from Fiddler on the Roof, when, they're going through so much problems. And Tevi says, I know, he's talking to God, and he says, I know, we are your chosen people. But once in a while, can't you choose someone else? You wonder if Joseph thought that. I know, we're you're chosen, we're blessed, but can you maybe find somebody else to do this for? It also reminds me of Job in the Bible. He was a very blessed man who loses everything, and he kind of questions God, and he says, why me? And he says, why was I born? Can I just die? And then finally Job says in Job 40:30-5, he kind of, after trying to argue all this with God, he says, behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. With all the blessings and trials that followed Job, he finally just said, there's nothing I'm going to say. I'm just going to be quiet. And maybe Joseph came to this point in his life too, where I'm done trying to figure you out, God, and argue with you. I'm just going to be quiet and let you do your thing. So Joseph, though, here in our scripture this afternoon, he's in Potiphar's house and he's experiencing the favor of God. But if you know the story, not very much longer into it, with Potiphar's wife, she thinks Joseph, he's kind of this young stud, and she's attracted to him. Her hormones are kind of raging, and she throws herself at Joseph, wants to sleep with him, and Joseph refuses multiple times until the point where this gets him thrown into prison for his troubles. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the coming next week, really. But I just wanted to preface what I'm talking about when I say his favor is upon him, but troubles are also following him. So we can see through the life of Joseph and in other people, but certainly in the life of Joseph here, that the favor of God being upon you doesn't mean everything is going to be smooth. There's going to be no trials for you, that everything is going to just go along swimmingly. That's not what the favor of God means or brings. And so this afternoon I want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why God's favor, it can bring both blessings and trials and testing and hardship. So it brings both prosperity and sometimes prosperity and poverty, blessings and battles. So there's four things I want to point out as to why this is true, why it brings both. Why does the favor of God bring both? First of all is that if God's favor is upon you and you're giving your life to God, then Satan is going to come against you. Last Sunday morning in our Sunday school class, we were talking a little bit about submission and authority. And I mentioned in that class, I wasn't teaching it, but I just mentioned that God, when he gives authority over to somebody, over some organization or some situation, whether it be a family or a church or a workplace, it's kind of like an umbrella. And we have to see authority as like an umbrella, and an umbrella protects those under it from the rain and from the attacks. And so, in a lot of ways, we might see God's favor as like, oh, we've been given something, but that's kind of that thing that we become like that umbrella for other people. In many ways, Joseph was the one who he was going to save and care for his family in a later time from famine. But he's the one that then he's been given this authority. He's been given this job. He's been given this calling. But he's the one who Satan then attacks. He's the one who has to take the shots. He's the one that has to go be sold into slavery and then go to jail. He came under the attack of Satan as the one God had set over his family as the protector. It's like a picture that I've seen online of a father who's kind of thrown his body over his children, and you see the arrows in his back as he protects his kids. That's the picture of authority. It's also the picture of God's calling, God's blessing, God's favor in your life. Is that Satan then comes after you, and you are protecting those around you. Maybe it's a story that I've heard a long time ago about a barn that caught on fire, and the farmer let all the animals open the door, and all the animals got out and put the fire out. And he went in and he found this chicken that was laying there and it was dead. And he's like, "Why didn't this chicken get out?" And when he went to pick the charred chicken up, and I think it probably had died from smoke inhalation more than burns, that underneath this chicken were all these little chicks. And the mother hen had, protected the chicks. That's the calling sometimes. When you're blessed of God, you're called to give, to be the protector, to be the one who takes the fiery darts from Satan. My wife's least favorite Christmas cartoon is called Nestor the Long-Eared Donkey. And in that cartoon, Nestor, it's all, fictional, it's imaginary, it's not biblical at all, but it uses a biblical story. And Nestor, he's got long ears, and he's eventually the donkey that Joseph and Mary buy to take her to Bethlehem. The Bible doesn't even say she rode a donkey. Quite possibly she did. But that said, within the story, he's got long ears. His master doesn't want him, so he throws him out into the snow. And, his mother comes out, and in the middle of the snowstorm, she kind of covers up Nestor, and she ends up dying as Nestor lives. So there, once again, there's that story, and Nestor goes on to have this place, this role to fulfill in bringing Mary to Bethlehem. A fictional story, but it does illustrate what I'm talking about in the sense that when you are giving some sort of favor, some sort of blessing in life, sometimes you're the ones that takes the shots, and that's what happens exactly here with Joseph. When God calls us to do anything, and whether it be an authority position that Joseph eventually has. And even as a slave here, he's given a measure of authority, but he's still a slave. Or it could just be someone who humbly serves behind the scenes, like working in the nursery, or visiting shut-ins, or sending cards to people. We can expect if we're fulfilling this call of God's in our life, we can expect both God's favor and blessing, but we can also expect some evil forces to come against us. And this is a big part of what's happening here in Joseph's life. But God's not surprised nor thwarted by these attacks. God is using these attacks of Satan to destroy the very plans of Satan. Satan's plan is once again to wipe out this chosen family from the face of the earth. And he thinks he's doing it one guy at a time, including Joseph, but it's the very attacks of Satan that God turns him around to destroy his plans. Well, the second reason why God's favor often brings blessings and trials with it is that God uses the testings, he uses the trials to refine us. Joseph, during this time of testing, he grows from being a sort of know-it-all, that snot-nosed kid who's smart and good-looking, but really hasn't learned it all. That he becomes less self-righteous. He becomes humbler. He becomes wiser. And eventually he becomes a powerful man. If he had become the second in command of Egypt without going through all of this, all that he did, I'm certain that he would have abused that power. He had almost unchecked power, a blank check, if you will, given to him by Pharaoh. And if he hadn't gone through what he had gone through to become humble, to learn the lessons he did, well, that would have been too much of a temptation for a young man, and he would have let that power corrupt him. You know, they say power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts, unless God protects you and has brought you through situations. He might have used the power, if he hadn't gone through all that, he might have used the power that he would get to destroy his brothers rather than to save them. Most certainly would have caused him to be very puffed up and egotistical. Quite possibly he would have lost sight of what God had done and to think, well, how he had done it all, kind of take all the credit for himself, for getting him into that position. But I think by the time he goes through all this, he realizes it's only by the grace of God that he ends up being in the second in command. And it doesn't go to his head like it should have, like it would have normally. I think it's easy for us as humans to think we're so wonderful that we can end up breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back. And so God sometimes brings us through testings and trials in life. It refines us. It causes us to be more dependent upon Him. It brings a humility out in our lives that we need if we're going to truly serve Him and have that favor and that grace in our life. The third thing I want to point out to us about why we sometimes, in the midst of God's favor, not only do His blessings come our way, but testings and trials comes our way, is that these things that we think of as testings and that God's picking on us or the universe is against us, is that really everyone is going through them. It's universal in that regards. Those following God experience them, and those rebelling against God also experience them. This is a reality of life. Everyone has bad things happen to them. Everyone has loved ones that die. Everyone has cars that go kaput. Everyone has people who stab them in the back. Everyone has some sort of health issues at some point in their life. Everyone's been lied to. Everyone has lost a friend. Everyone has a black sheep in their family. Some people are the black sheep of their family. We've all had a broken heart. Most everyone has had some sort of financially lean times. Not everything that happens to us is an attack from Satan, and not everything that happens to us is God trying to get your attention. It's not always a punishment from heaven. Lots of times, it's just the fact that we live in a fallen, imperfect, sinful world, and things are going to run a little bumpy until God redeems His creation. Hurricane Helene that recently hit western North Carolina, it hit the kind, Christ-loving, good people just like it did the selfish, hateful, terrible, murderers and whatever else people. God's favor, it will eventually rescue us from this world. For most people, that will occur when they die. That's the ultimate favor of God, that when we die, we're rescued from all these things. Until that time comes, we have a job to do, and we sort of have to, like the President-elect said when he was shot in the ear, fight, fight, fight. We have to fight, fight, fight through the tough times, sometimes with God's help, of course. But sometimes that's life. And it's got nothing to do with, anybody attacking us or picking on us. It's just the way life is. The last and final reason why sometimes God's favor brings both blessings and difficulties, why God's favor brings good times and tough times, why God's favor brings the storms and the sunshine, is that it's not really why, but it's a reminder, if you will, when we're going through it, is that His presence is with us through both, through the ups and downs. Whereas those who don't love God, those who have rejected Him, those who have kept Him away at arm's length, they go through the same things, like I mentioned, without God. But we, as His people, go through them with Him. That's what sets us apart. That's the ultimate favor of God, is that He walks with us through the darkest of valleys. Psalms 23, I'm going to be pointing that out in this point. He walks with us through the darkest valleys. He prepares a table for us before our enemies. His goodness and his mercy and his love, they follow us all the days of our lives. And we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The 23rd Psalm is just a reminder that through the ups and the downs, God is with us. He is our good shepherd. And that is the ultimate favor of God, that he does not leave us or forsake us. God's favor over Joseph is that God was with him in that hole that his brothers threw him into. God was with him when he was a slave in the house of Potiphar. God was with him when he was thrown into the Egyptian jail. And God was with him in the office of the second in command of the land. God was with him through the good times and the bad times, through the ups and the downs. He never left him. And that is ultimately the favor of God that we all should want in our life. So once again, I'm going to pray in just a moment. I just want to remind everybody this weekend we have our Christmas party at church on Saturday. If you haven't already RSVP'd for that, you can send me a message here on Facebook, or if you're watching this on Wednesday. If you're watching it on Thursday, well, you can still try to send me a message, especially Thursday morning. I think we can try to get you in, but it gets too close to it, and we've already bought all the food. So please, if you listen to this today or tomorrow, let us know if you'd like to come. And then Sunday morning is our worship team is putting on a Christmas program, a musical. And so we're looking forward to that with some narration and some music and some solos and whatnot. So we hope you can come. It's our normal worship time, 10:45. I'll be giving a brief devotional as well. And so we really hope that you can join, invite your friends and families, and be here. If you can't, I know some people listen that live far away or go to other churches. Well, we'll be live streaming that here as well. So God bless. Let me pray for you. Father, I do pray for your favor to rest upon your people, for those that are listening, Lord. And maybe there's somebody that's not given their life to you, and that they would do that, knowing that you'll never leave them or forsake them. That is the greatest gift of all, that we don't walk alone in this life. So I pray now for your people to just remind us of that today. They're going through some hard times. They're going through some difficult times. They're not alone. That you are walking with them through it. We pray these things in your name. Amen. And God bless. Thanks again for listening. I trust and hope that it's been an encouragement for you. And God bless.